Brennan Lee Mulligan is so good at monologuing in large part because he's intelligent and because he feels and feels strongly, and drama begets monologues. But why are his monologues in particular so compelling? What secret of language has he unlocked? What sword did he pull out of what stone to find himself upon this pedestal? And how can your D&D villains or you yourself draw people in this way? I'm so glad you asked. Please find your seats, pull out your notebooks. Class is starting, people.
You want to know what I've always hated about mortals? You want to know the real reason you guys all talk shit about New York?
Hypophora, otherwise known as asking a question, then answering it. Sounds simple, and it kind of is. To be done effectively, though, you need to ask the right questions, and you need to ask them at the right time. When Brennan asks, "You want to know what I've always hated about mortals?" the question is compelling, because the being asking the question is talking to mortals. An evil entity is offering insight into its perspective, but more importantly, it's offering its opinion about a group of people to said group. People are selfish. Making your enemies not just evil, but giving characters and players personal reasons to hate them motivates them all the more to put up a fight. And if your villain has some sort of personal connection to the party or has thoughts about who they are and what they represent, they're going to want to know. Ask a question along the lines of, "You know what's wrong with you?" And at least for a moment, you've got their attention. You want to know the real reason you guys all talk shit about New York? The point of that question isn't New York, even if it might seem that way. This is another question about the people he's talking to, but more than that, he's offering them secret knowledge. Maybe they don't care what the villain thinks of them, but if that villain suggests that they know something about the party that the party doesn't even know, they're gonna be hooked. If you specifically struggle with starting a monologue and players interrupting you or just not really listening, just make the monologue about them, at least at first. Have your villain imply that they have an important opinion or know something about the characters that the characters themselves don't even know. And here's the really important part. Don't let the question be rhetorical. Always answer it and make sure they never forget the answer.
But in this sick rodeo, this bizarre, fucked up clown festival, be decent. And I won't have to come for whatever mid-range zip code spawned your country mouse ass after I look up how to roast it in the encyclopedia of places nobody gives a shit about. And if we check my point total here, I don't need to walk to the front because I know what it is. It's a big old goose egg, gang. It's a fat 0.
Now, class, what do all these statements have in common? That's right, metaphor. In case your figure of speech knowledge isn't up to standard, and this class does have standards, a metaphor replaces one thing with something else that represents it. Brennan could have just said, "But in this game show that Sam has put together," but what's the fun in that? It's not a game show. It's a sick rodeo, a bizarre, fucked up clown festival. His metaphors paint a picture of something that's traditionally fun turned chaotic and dark, aka game changer. I don't want to have to come not for the small town you came from, but for whatever mid-range zip code spawned your country mouse ass. It's just not as powerful to say, "You came from a small town, so that tells me you had a hard time transitioning to New York." He reduces the people he's talking to country mice, using metaphor to minimize and belittle a foundational part of their upbringing. And when he's checking the score, it is a big fat 0, but before that, it's a big old goose egg. And this one isn't even a negative. Metaphor used in the midst or beginning of a monologue doesn't have to attack, but can simply color language, make it more entertaining, more amusing, more engaging. Make your villain artists with their words, whether or not they're using that art to cut down their enemies. And speaking of a goose egg, a big, fat 0.
Hello! A little late addition to the numerical symbol chart brought to us from our friends in Arabia. A little bit of trivia that I happen to know about the history of numbers. That kind of little tidbit would serve me well in most trivia games, unless it had been rigged from the beginning!
One problem you might encounter trying to monologue or rant or talk for a long time in general is that you might feel you don't have enough to say. And to that I say, hone in. As you go, pick one piece of the puzzle, one particular detail, and elaborate on it. Don't go so far off that you lose the plot and can't return. Know how the bunny trail reconnects to the main path. The point isn't the 0. The 0, followed by a fun fact about the 0, loops back around to the main point of Brennan's rant. The fact that the game was designed so that he specifically could not earn any points, despite his extensive trivia knowledge. And if you do lean into some elaboration, choose what effect you want it to have. Is the goal to make a point more menacing? Is your villain giving an example of a time someone else struggled against them only for their life to end in crushing defeat? Or are you going for comedic effect? In the bit about why his coworkers don't like New York, Brennan's character branches off into a brief but impactful stories actually about the situations he's found himself in, the horrifying sights he's seen. They're so horrible that they become ridiculous. And bonus tip about comedy, it's the unexpected that makes people laugh. So elaborate, but make sure that whatever you choose to elaborate on is in some way adding to the monologue rather than detracting from it in a slowly devolving spiral of chaos. Stick to the point.
You can have my points when you pry them from my cold, dead hands. I would no sooner surrender my points than I would surrender my life, my heart, my sacred memory of all that came before. My points tell the story of who I am, where I've come from, and what I've done. You shall not have my points, negative infinity.
The words surrender and points are repeated here twice each. They don't have to be. He could have easily said, I would no sooner surrender my points than I would my life, my heart, my sacred memory of all that came before. They tell the story of who I am. That would still have been a compelling statement, but when he picks out certain words to repeat, points, surrender, they make a heavier impact because they become more present. Viewers know without a shadow of a doubt what Brennan is most worried about in that moment. Villains are villains because, like Brennan, they are passionate about something they maybe shouldn't be, or something that they should be but don't handle in the correct manner, but something nevertheless. It may not be apparent to the characters for a long time what that is, at least not fully, but most villain monologues tend to arrive at the end of the road, beyond the point of no return. Reveal all or drop hints through the words you choose to repeat. Another way to go about implementing repetition is anaphora, which is when a word or phrase gets repeated specifically at the beginning of a sentence. For example,
you are not our children. You are a bad first draft. You did this to me! You and your kin. You think my enemy?
The beginning of each sentence, like the beginning of a monologue, can grip an audience over and over again. The word you repeat, whether it's you, surrender, points, when used at the beginning of several successive sentences, will enhance that punctuated effect. Subtle repetition is good and can be used a little more often, but clear and pointed repetition at the start of a sentence is a strong choice for when you really want to make an impact. When you reach the most memorable, the most emotionally piercing moment, remember the anaphora. And finally, what all of these examples have in common is their pacing. Brennan knows to slow down and speed up at the right moments, but even the structure of his monologues is paced. The road we're on is winding, but it's not chaotic. And I'm willing to bet you've been shown this path before. The classic 5-act structure. A monologue is a story. You have your exposition. Maybe it's a question. Maybe it's the start of a seemingly innocuous story, but it works as a hook to pique people's interest, get them invested. You then have the rising action, where it's clear a monologue has begun. It's leading somewhere bigger than where it began. Tension is building and eventually must be broken, and that's when the monologue reaches its climax. At the climax, you might reveal the big plot twist, the ultimate goal, reach the declaration of intent, of purpose, but you don't have to stop there. Your villain, if they have control, pulls back from this moment of impact and clarity. Falling action, slow it down again, and reach a resolution. They've made a final decision, a final declaration. Nothing is more frightening than a villain with a sense of control. And a note on verbal pacing, don't get so excited during the monologue that you start talking too fast and stumble over your words. If you're doing that, you're probably also losing the necessary tone to get your point across, and some impact. Practice. If you know a monologue is coming, or if you want to get better at them in general, work on your delivery. Get some of that excitement out so that in the right moment, there's control and confidence. Which does mean, I hope it is clear, that you do have homework tonight. Get out your notebooks. Tonight, I would like you to write a monologue using at least 2 of the above methods: hypophora, metaphor, elaboration, and repetition. You are encouraged to share your works in the comments below, but are not required to do so. Don't worry, if you've made it to the end of this video, you will receive an A in this class by default. And if I receive a single parent email complaining to me that you decide to revolt at the dinner table through the implementation of a carefully crafted and cutting monologue, I will dig so far into the depths of grammar instruction, you will long for the days I discussed hypophora and anaphora on this godforsaken YouTube channel. And don't forget to like, subscribe, check out my Patreon, and have a great whatever it is for you. And I will see you next time.